So IO is out as of last Friday, and this seems like a good time to close the loop, as it were, to talk about the impression that the whole thing makes on me now that we can sit down and go through it all front to back. So I took a little bit of time to listen to each of the three mixes in one sitting in a relatively focused way. I just wanted to offer a few thoughts. Now, back when I was listening to the singles individually, my feeling at that time was that the production and the soundscaping are interesting in places, but perhaps not as distinctive or compelling as they could be relative to the sheer scale of time and resources that were put into the project. That the album is better when it's quiet than it is when it's grand and sweeping, and then it's pretty much never really that surprising. Although, honestly, the song, and Still, the second to last song, did have some elements in it that were really kind of left field that I was a little bit surprised by. So, some credit there. I never addressed that song in a single video, or in a video on the single, but I was a bit surprised by that. The melodies are often nice, but not compulsively memorable. And lyrically, it's quite moving when it thinks about aging and mortality and relationships and how those things interact. Perhaps not great when it considers social issues, and occasionally maybe just sort of incoherent. And overall, actually, I'd say listening to the whole thing hasn't really changed any of those specific observations. To sum it all up, the negative thing I'd say about the album is there's just kind of like a haze of mediocrity to some of the production and writing that might be a result of its enormous gestation period and the general risk aversion of being somebody who has that level of celebrity and critical reputation at stake. And the risk aversion has kept this album from having one track where all the elements come together in a really striking and perfect and unexpected way in the manner of something like, Darkness or Signal to Noise from Up. The positive version of that, though, is that it's almost never unpleasant, and there is often, real compelling feeling that pushes through some of the mediocrity. And with some distance, I think the moving power of that expression, of that emotion, really probably is more memorable. It kind of sticks in your long-term impression of the album more than the parts that are kind of meh or underwhelming. It's notably imperfect, particularly, again, for something that has been worked on so long, but as a thoughtful meditation on aging and mortality, as the kind of album that you would expect at this point in his career, it's mostly pretty good. There's a lot of it that I'll remember fondly, and I am glad that it came out. It's fascinating to me that the album seems to confront the end of his life in the most direct way. It's somehow also probably his most optimistic, least dark album. Really, I think of his whole career. And that's a very intriguing way for that to have come out. It makes it kind of a distinct statement compared to a lot of the things that other high profile artists have done as they've kind of faced down either their own mortality or others. Very different from how, for instance, Peter Hamill has thought about the same subject in his later work. And I think that's pretty interesting. It's a cool niche for it to have in the kind of larger structure of late career works by prog elder statesmen, or just generally, the elder statesmen of music overall. With that out of the way, I thought it'd be fun to take a little bit of time to respond to some of the comments, as I did, when I finished the Genesis and Peter Hamill videos. It's incredibly gratifying to me when I say things on the channel and people pay attention and respond thoughtfully. It's one of my favorite things about doing the channel, maybe my favorite thing. The video, for instance, on Does It Matter That I Missed All the Great Shows? Not a lot of people watched that. I think it only got 100 and some views. It was probably actually one of my least viewed videos, but all the people who did watch it really seemed to approach it thoughtfully, think about what it was saying, have their own very interesting thoughts in relationship to it. I really enjoyed that, and it's one of my favorite things that I've done, and I'm glad I did it, even though, from a metric standpoint, it was not really much of a success at all. So the song Four Kinds of Horses didn't really attract many thoughts or a lot of comments. My own video was sort of an extended shrug. I think of all the tracks on the album, it's a perfectly fine one, I suppose, but it hasn't really brought out a lot of passion from anybody. But somebody did bring something up that I wanted to address. Paul Langan here, I'm not going to read it out loud, but he offers a quote from Gabriel's website about the meaning of the lyrics and about the production process, presumably because I expressed some confusion over the point of the lyrics, praised the production of the album. Now, I am aware that that material exists. He's drawing most likely from the Full Moon newsletter or from one of the videos connected to it. I did subscribe to the email newsletter. I did get those updates, but I generally avoided reading them ahead of listening to the song to do the review because I did want to respond to the material on its own terms. I wanted to hear how he had succeeded rather than what he was trying to do, if that makes any sense. I do appreciate, though, here that Paul has made the effort to supply some context, and I do hope that everybody who watched the video also encountered this comment to kind of help fill out some of the things that I was wondering about during my review. So the title track to I.O., I had some measured thoughts on, right, with a mix of positive and negative impressions. I liked the writing, but I thought the production was maybe underwhelming, especially relative to the just sheer amount of time and resources that went into the album. That's a theme I'll come back to a few times in these responses to comments. There are some people who had, a better opinion than others about how I expressed that balance. Now, the best comment here, and probably the best in the whole set connected to this album, comes from Matt Mateo. I don't have time to read you the whole thing, but here are a few key quotes. By overanalyzing technicality, you lose scope of the whole thing. Now, it does seem like he was better able than I was to overlook the song's somewhat milquetoast production and arrangement, enjoy it as a piece of writing and as a motive statement about, where Gabriel is at this point in his life. I'm genuinely glad he got that feeling from the song. I'm glad he had a good experience with it. And I do sometimes think about how the imperative to have something interesting to say tends to perhaps change the way that I experience, especially new releases that I'm planning to review on the channel. Probably that's true for most critics to some extent. It encourages me to listen much more closely, but I may get hung up on fine details in a way that perhaps I wouldn't if I weren't planning to, go on the internet and try to find something smart to say about it. It might be that if not for that context, I might have liked the song more or kind of connected with its emotion in a purer way, as Matt did. On the other hand, though, music is sound, right? You hear sound, you have an emotional reaction to objectively describable, distinguishable aspects of the sound. Then you try to determine how the construction of the sound has worked to evoke that response. That's the work of a music critic, really, and also an important exercise to do if you are indeed a professional musician, as he says he is here. If When the Levee Breaks had been recorded with tiny, dry little drums instead of, natural reverb from an old mansion or whatever it was, it would change the impact of that recording regardless of the quality of the writing and the performance, right? Now, that's obviously, that's the most obvious go-to example in the world, right? But, the point still stands, I think. So I accept the point that, the feeling of having to use the critical apparatus maybe changes your relationship to something, perhaps sometimes in corrosive ways, but I also respectfully reject the idea that thinking about production details and sonic construction and how they have an impact on someone as a listener is necessarily illegitimate. Now, Matt had a point about the lyrics here as well. Yes, I.O. is simpler in lyrics than many songs while still being well written, but it's funny how you caught the likeness of the octopus suckers to the dogs, cats, flies, and rats. He's catching there the comparison of a line in I.O. to a line in the earlier song, I Grieve. And you monumentally missed with the vehicle in neutral and the ground to be faced, and it's just the car that we're driving, the home we reside in. That's, again, a lyric from I.O. paired with a similarly metaphorical lyric in the song I Grieve. Now, that's a very thoughtful connection he's making between those two lyrics. I do appreciate it. One thing that I've wondered about a few times with this album is the difference between being self-referential and just being uncreative, right? The difference between making an interesting statement by deliberately borrowing aspects of what you've done in the past versus just kind of accidentally repeating yourself through poor editing. Now, you've convinced me here in this comment to view the similarities between the two lyrics as being actually an effective statement, right? That what he's doing in the song I.O. is sort of a positive inversion of I Grieve, taking a similar concept, similar metaphorical imagery, right? And then inverting its emotional polarity to make something that is thematically similar, yet really in many ways a totally different experience. I think that's pretty cool. And lastly, the observation here that sometimes good old stuff with a touch of new is more than good enough is probably the best case you can make for the whole album, really. So credit there for summing it up well, and I really appreciate the thoughts. Now we have a comment here from John Hinsman. This is typically the problem with critics. It's so easy to tear apart work, but the real genius is the creativity itself. Peter and his team have created more memorable music in a lifetime than most. I don't know what the point is here. Yeah, it's easier to review an album on YouTube than it is to make a big budget major label release. So, it's harder to cook a meal than it is to eat a meal and say whether or not you liked it. I don't see how that's relevant to anything. I don't know if the subtext here is that, because Peter Gabriel made some really great music 30 or 40 years ago, and because he put 20 years of intermittent effort and, I don't know, probably $500,000 into this album, that I'm obligated somehow to either call it brilliant or shut up. And if you can invest, once again, 20 years of at least intermittent effort, again, I don't know the actual number, but I would imagine an ungodly vast sum of money, the world's best session players, if you can take all those things and come out with something that in many places sounds strikingly similar to something one person could make in his bedroom with $2,000 worth of plugins, which was the whole point of my video, I think that's a fascinating fact about the state of contemporary music. I think it's a really interesting thing to ponder. Now, if you disagree with that on the merits, great. But, of course, he's not doing that. Now, my review of the songs Panopticon, The Court, and Playing for Time, to some extent, those were focused on the overall release strategy. I didn't really get many thoughts about the songs themselves. Mostly it was about how people were responding to getting the songs in kind of a drip like they were. But my mom, whose consistent support of the channel is deeply appreciated, had this to say. I wonder how many people will attend his tour and watch the concert through their phone. To which I replied, maybe he can make that a component of the show somehow. Now, I'm almost never self-aggrandizing, but I think that was actually a really good idea. And it's too bad that he wasn't reading my comments section when he was planning the tour. Now, lastly, we have the song Road to Joy. I actually didn't read these comments as they came in. I tend to read my comments weekly in a batch when I upload the next video. I logged in to upload the Proto Marta video. I saw that Road to Joy had like a 30% like ratio, and somehow it generated about 800 views while gaining 0 subscribers, which is a real miracle of wasted traffic. And I just had no desire to see what people were saying about it, frankly. Now, when everybody got pissed off at the Porcupine Tree video, that actually ended up juicing the channel, right? But in this case, not only did the video itself not do well, not grow the channel, not generate any subscriber growth or, anybody going back and watching some of the other videos and leaving thoughtful comments, which, it's my favorite thing when that happens. But, none of the subsequent I.O. videos did well either. So, the Road to Joy video, I suppose, has gone down as a bit of a low light in the history of the channel. One thing I should note, like I mentioned in the 4 Kinds of Horses video, I hadn't watched The New Moon on this song. I have now, so I was not aware at that time because, again, I was trying to approach the material fresh. I was not aware that the song is taken from a concept album about the brain, and it's about a person coming out of a coma. So that does clarify some of the lyrical imagery that felt more kind of strange and random to me. I don't know if the concept album will be coming out, his concept album about the brain that this is from. If Experience is any guide, it seems hard to imagine that it will. I think if you're going to lift something from a concept album, you might maybe revise it so that it makes sense as a freestanding piece. But let's get into the comments. Sucks? If Big Time Sledgehammer and Steam suck. First of all, the fact that song A is good doesn't mean that we have to like song D, which is a fourth generation watered down clone of song A. Sledgehammer, okay, like that's a pretty good, funky little pop song with a clever lyric. That opening flute theme is pretty cool, but it's unfortunate that the success, and I think I said this in the Road to Joy video, it's unfortunate that the success of Sledgehammer seems to have led him to feel like every album needs some sort of upbeat, funky party song, to the extent of apparently, grabbing one wholesale from an unrelated concept album, plunking it down in the middle of something where it makes no real thematic or tonal sense. Now, one thing I expected when I went into the comments for this album was a more energetic defense of Kiss That Frog, which I did call a bad song right there in the thumbnail. I really thought that I would be using this video to lay out the reasons I don't like Kiss That Frog, but that I saw at least nobody stood up on its behalf in the comments, which kind of surprised me because at the very least, it does appear on what's probably now regarded a classic album, and it's at least way more clever than Road to Joy. But I will say what I don't like about Kiss That Frog now, because it ties to what I don't like about this song, which is that, 70% of Us is such a moody, thoughtful, emotional, deep, beautiful album, right? Such a wonderful reflection on alienation from one's romantic partner. And then you throw in Steam, which I do also think kind of sucks, and Kiss That Frog, and, it completely ruins the vibe, it messes up the statement. And yes, of course, you can just skip those two songs or program them out. But if you imagine, taking those out and replacing them with two songs that have the darkness and power and melancholy of Come Talk to Me or Digging in the Dirt or Secret World, then that becomes an all-time classic, right? In much the same way that if you took out Barry Williams' Show and replaced it with another really good song about existential dread, then the sequencing of Up would make more sense. Or in much the same way that if you took Road to Joy and replaced it with another thoughtful meditation on aging and mortality, I.O. would, I think, be stronger as an overall statement. Gabrielle8019 says, but did you understand it or not that the quotes are made on purpose? If you listen closely, there are also themes from Ovo, the guitar line of Tower That Ate People, reprises from Up, guitar effects from I Grieve, No Way Out, and from Us, Kiss That Frog. There's also a Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze quote. For me, as a true Peter Gabriel fan, true fans appreciate the funky uptempo version of Peter Gabriel. This release is gold. Let's see. So, if you're wondering, in the New Moon video, in the update that I've been referencing a few times, I didn't see any reference on Peter's part to deliberately quoting a bunch of things from his own back catalog as part of the statement. So if I missed that, I don't feel too bad because I think, Peter Gabriel himself missed it as well, even though apparently he did it on purpose. So don't feel too bad about that. It's very unfortunate that I've been thrown out of the true Peter Gabriel fan club for not thinking that rewriting Sledgehammer 3 or 4 times to diminishing returns was that good an idea. Now, I do respect that, some real thought and observation went into this comment. Obviously, this person is deeply familiar with Gabriel's body of work. I do appreciate and respect that. This is, in its way, a pretty knowledgeable observation. Doesn't really make me like the song anymore. If the aesthetic idea of the song is to quote references from his whole body of work, why is he choosing the worst song on Us, the guitar effect from a couple of pretty good songs on his last album, like mid-tier stuff, and themes, whatever we mean by that, from kind of a middling side project? Now, in this case, I'm not really convinced that it was done on purpose. I'm not convinced that self-plagiarism is a credible artistic strategy. And, where the song I.O. recontextualizes metaphors from I Grieve in a moving way, this is kind of the bad version of that. As someone who saw Genesis with Gabriel's first show in the US and all his following tours with that band, it's unfathomable how he went from an avant-garde cult figure to making music for people to dance the Alley Cat to at low-budget weddings on Long Island. His band even does the Alley Cat on stage, which of course makes me die inside. So it killed my interest in him, and whenever I do check his later stuff out, my worst expectations are met. It helps to realize that his band are full-time session musicians, some like Levin having played on perhaps 1,000 recordings. A certain type of flat perfection will always come when using this type of commercial musician, and most of PG's stuff post-so reflects it. PG himself also seems remarkably unplugged into the new music happening everywhere. I actually didn't know what the Alley Cat was. I had to look it up. But yeah, I actually hate it when they do that too. I saw him during the Sting tour. When they started doing that, I was ready for the show to be over. Now, this guy and I do have totally different opinions about the post-so material, right? As I've said a few times elsewhere in this video, I think Us and Up are um, in their best points, which they are more often than not, moving and lovely and brilliant and often among his best work. But in spite of that disagreement, and in spite of the fact that this guy probably does think I'm an idiot, though he was kind enough not to say so, I still actually really enjoyed reading this take, and I appreciate it. Let's end on a high note here. A little off topic, but I love that you play very helpful snippets of the songs, unlike anybody else that I know of. I know copyright strikes are the terror of human progress in this day, so I really appreciate the examples. Thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. All right, I'll be back next week with more on the new Camel box set. Thanks much, as always, for your thoughts, except that one guy, and hope everybody has a good day.